subscribe to our YouTube channel, Joy Learning TV.
Hello students from all over the world. Welcome to your favorite SHSR on Joy Learning, Integrated Science, Form 2. Last week we discussed something on soils, and today we shall continue with what we started last week. But to start, we'll have to address or answer the questions we posed at the tail end of our discussion. In our question, we asked that what was soil? And then the second part was to define the conservation of soil. So we have to start by first saying that soil is the loose material that covers the immediate surface of the earth. And with the conservation of soil, we can say that it is the general methods or principles used to prevent soil erosion and other deterioration in order to prevent soil fertility loss as well as soil productivity loss. Today, we shall continue with the discussion, and before we start, we will have to look at our learning objectives for the day. So at the end of this lesson, students, you will be able to state the functions of some nutrients and their deficiency symptoms. And then we shall also look at how to describe methods of maintaining soil fertility. And the last one on our building is to outline factors which lead to the depletion of the soil nutrients. So we move on to the first concept for the day. In discussing the functions and deficiency symptoms of some essential plant nutrients, we stated that we have essential nutrients and then we also have the macro essential as well as the micro essential. And we stated that some of the macro essential nutrients were nitrogen, potassium, we also have phosphorus, iron, and boron. So we are going to look at the functions of these mineral elements in the soil. Now on your screen, we have a very small table indicating the nutrients and the role it plays in the soil, that is the function, as well as the deficiency. We shall start right away with nitrogen. Nitrogen, like I mentioned earlier, is a major constituent of plant protein. So nitrogen is needed in the synthesis of protein in a plant. So it is an essential nutrient needed by the soil to enhance plant growth. So it's a major constituent of plant protein and other organic compounds. In the absence of nitrogen in the soil, plants will have their leaves becoming yellowing, the process we call chlorosis in science. So you have chlorosis of older leaves, and the plant will also not grow well. So we see the plant has stunted growth. The plant is struggling to grow, so we have what we call stunted growth. Now next on a bill is our phosphorus, another essential macro element, phosphorus. So the function of the phosphorus in the soil is that it is required for respiration, metabolism, and then cell division. Now we also need phosphorus for seed germination and formation. So for the seed to germinate well and form well, you need phosphorus. And then you also need the phosphorus in the soil for root development. Now as a deficiency of phosphorus in the soil, we have older leaves have purple or green color, and then you also have poor roots and bark development. So the leaf of the old one becomes purple, as well as even the younger ones, and then the root as well as the bark doesn't develop well. You also have stunting of green parts of the plant. So the plant will be there, but it will not be growing properly. Now we are also going to consider the next nutrient, and that is potassium. Potassium, the element with the atomic number 19 with the chemical symbol K. Now potassium is an essential nutrient in the soil, and it's needed to catalyze major physiological activities in the plant. So the plant will also have to go through certain chemical reactions that will allow it to survive. and these reactions are catalyzed by potassium in the plants. Now, to help the plant do that, it must imbibe potassium from the soil and to grow well. Now, apart from that function of potassium, we can also say that potassium regulates water intake by the plant, and it also neutralizes organic acids in the plant. In the plant also, it aids what we call nitrate absorption, nitrogen, which is needed by the plant for protein material synthesis. It's also absorbed through the usage of potassium in the soil by the plant. Now, a deficiency of potassium in the soil, therefore, is also leading to chlorosis of the leaves because you don't have nitrogen in there. And then you also have curling of the leaves and browning of the leaves. So if you see a young plant and the plant looks stunted, the leaves looks yellowish, and you also see the leaves curling. Not that it is wilting, but it is curling. Then it could mean that the plant is in need of potassium. Now, apart from that, you could also have delay in maturity of the plant, and that is the same as the stunted growth. On your screens, you also observe that we have another major element needed by plants in soils, and that is manganese. Manganese, the chemical symbol Mn, manganese. Now, manganese function as a way of regulating redox reactions in plants. We know that redox reactions, there are several reactions in science and in chemistry. One of the reactions is classified as what we call redox reactions. And these are reactions that involve changes in oxidation numbers of the reactants with respect to the product. So manganese is needed for these reactions in the plants. And that means that if the plant is not able to get manganese, it will not grow well, and that is also going to affect the yield. It also catalyzes chlorophyll activity. So remember, the plant needs chlorophyll to photosynthesize and to produce food, which eventually animals and we humans will also go for some. Now, this means that the deficiency of manganese in the soil will equally affect the plants, and that will result in the tops of the young leaves showing yellowish green discoloration. So you have the tops of the young leaves showing yellowish discoloration. There's another element on the periodic table called molybdenum. Molybdenum, which is also needed by plants, and the function of the molybdenum is to help in nitrogen fixation through its influence in plant enzyme system. So you have nitrogen fixation through its influence in plant enzyme systems. Now, it's also needed in the metabolism of nitrates into amino acids and proteins in the plant. Now, deficiency of molybdenum in the plant as well as the soil will lead to reduced nitrogen fixation, poor nitrogen transformation into plant protein. So if the plant is not able to produce protein materials, we will not be able to get our amino acids, or what we call the secondary protein. We shall also look at boron. Boron. On your screens, we have boron with the chemical symbol B. We did it earlier. So we have boron, and the function of the boron is regulation of various plant physiological activities. So you see that most of these major or macro nutrients we need in the soil for plants helps in regulating plants' physiological activities. And for boron, the absence of boron in the soil, and for that matter, the plant will result in death of the young plants and also irregular spots on young leaves and buds. It also results in decreases in the rate of water absorption. So the water will be there, but the plant cannot absorb it well. Interestingly, plants as well as animals need iron. Iron is a major element needed by both animals and plants because in animals, remember, it is used in the production of blood, the heme compound. But in plants, it is also used in the formation of chlorophyll. Very interesting. So it is also needed to produce chlorophyll. That green thing we find in the leaves, the green thing we find in plants, and that makes plants greenish and sometimes having other colors. Now, iron is therefore very, very important, and the absence of which will result in poor growth and yellowing of the leaves. So we have poor growth and yellowing of the leaves. Now on your screen, we have a section of a plant and some of the nutrients which are needed by the plant, out of which, if they are not there, the plant will show symptoms of the deficiency. And we have this diagram to guide us in what we have discussed earlier. So starting from the top to the right, we have iron deficiency. We said that it will result in yellowing. And then the plant also needs calcium. So you see that if the calcium is not there, this is exactly how the leaves will look like. So you can take shots and later compare it to plants around you, and then you'll be able to tell which element is lacking in the soil for the plant. So we have boron on the right-hand side, and then we have copper, as well as zinc, which animals like us also need equally. So we have nitrogen. Nitrogen, we said that you have chlorosis of the leaves, so you can see that it's looking yellowish, and it's also folded. And then you also have the molybdenum, where we said that you have irregular spots. So you see some irregular spots on that plant. We also have phosphorus and magnesium, and later we shall visit the picture. So another plant with the same deficiencies, but in another form. So you can also take a look at it and compare the two pictures, and you see that they are the same in terms of the deficiencies they are showing on your screens. Well, after talking about these important or essential nutrients we need in the soil, we want to move on to talk about soil fertility. Soil fertility. Now, the soil in which we find plants anchored to serves as a reservoir that the plant takes its nutrients as well as water, and for the roots you have oxygen. We can therefore say that substances which soils which are not able to supply the things I've mentioned earlier, we say are infertile. So soil fertility is simply the measure. It is a measure of the ability of a soil to provide mineral elements, water, oxygen that the plants need for its optimum growth and development. Now, a fertile soil, we know that is a rich soil which will naturally be rich in all the nutrients we have discussed earlier, and that is capable of sustaining a healthy growth of plants in a specific region. We have different types of plants and where they grow best. Different types of plants and where they grow best. So we want to juxtapose that to soil productivity. Soil productivity. So we want to compare the soil fertility, which is a measure of the soil's ability to provide the plant with all the essential nutrients. So what therefore is soil productivity? So we can move on to say that this overall crop yielding capacity of the soil, the amount of material or harvest the soil or the land can produce, is what we call the soil's productivity. Fertile soils produces more yield, so they have high soil productivity. And then we can say that this includes a blend of fertility as well as physical conditionings such as a structure, texture, and temperature of the soil. So apart from the nutrients, you also need a soil structure. If the soil is too porous, you will not have enough water in it, and for that matter, the plant cannot access it, and the fertility as well as the productivity of the soil will go down. Let us look at the characteristics of a fertile soil so that we'll be able to know, oh, this soil is better for planting or that soil is not good for planting. So we want to look at what therefore are the characteristics of a fertile soil. For a soil to be fertile, we can say that it must have adequate supply of nutrients. It must also have a high water holding capacity. So it means that the nutrients in the soil should be high enough for plants to access. The nutrients should not be far away from the roots also. It should be very near the surface so that the plant roots can access. And the soil must also contain a high amount of moisture for the plant. It shouldn't be waterlogged, but it should be optimum for the plant to access. And the soil too must be well aerated. Plants are living things and their roots are equally living. So when the soil is flooded, the roots cannot have access to air or oxygen. and that will result in the roots dying with the eventual death of the plant. So the soil must be well aerated, and it must also have a suitable pH. pH is simply a measure of the degree of acidity or alkalinity of the soil. How acidic or how basic the solution is what we call the pH of the soil. When we get to acid, bases, and salt under this program, you will learn more about pH. Now, a fertile soil must also have a suitable soil profile. The layers we have in the soil constitute what we call the soil profile. And a suitable soil with a very good soil profile will result in a very good character, and hence will affect the yield as well as the productivity. Now, another character we will consider here is that the soil must not contain plant metabolic poison. Many times people go around dumping chemicals in communities as well as places. Most of these chemicals are dangerous to humanity and other animals as well as plants. So when they are dumped into the community where you have an essential tree or a very important crop growing, the plants or the crops will die because those chemicals, which are acidic and some are just metabolic poisons, will end up killing the plant. So we move on to causes of loss of soil fertility. What results in a soil losing its fertility? So you have a soil, and then you are observing over a period of time the plants are or the crops are no longer doing well. So we want to know what is actually causing that. What are the causes of the loss of soil fertility? Now, there are several ways by which the soil loses its fertility. Some of them are, we know naturally that one major thing that causes soil fertility to erode is what we call erosion. Erosion or soil erosion. And soil erosion is simply the removal of the topsoil together with its stored nutrients either by water or wind. So you have this nice land, the surface is covered with nice soil and is very rich in humus. If nothing is covering the surface of the land or the soil, and you have a fast moving wind, it will carry the topsoil together with its humus and it will deposit them at another place. And that means that the nutrients in that soil will deplete appreciably over a shorter period of time. So on your screen, we have a picture of two different locations experiencing wind erosion. Wind erosion. In some countries, they even have an extreme wind leading to deserts or desertification. So those winds can equally erode the entire nutrients on the surface of the soil, and that means that the soil will lose its fertility. So it is important to grow cover crops or to create or erect windbreaks like we spoke about the other time. So we have other forms of wind erosion. Wind erosion. Now, we said that erosion can be caused by the wind as well as water. So if the wind can blow away or carry along with it the topsoil and its nutrients, then we can also have water equally doing that. When it rains heavily and the soil is bare, the water collects and it begins to move, and along the path where it moves, it collects those important nutrients which are very, very needed by the plant for its physiological activities. Now on our screen, we have two landforms with some amount of rain, but because of the topography of the place, the water collected on the surface of the soil is carrying the nutrients away. Now on the left hand side, we have a very nice farm, but because it is on a slope and they didn't do terracing, the water will carry along with it the important nutrients with it. Now on the right hand side, we have a well plowed land, but it has no soil cover. So the rains came and it has started creating sheets and eventually will result in gully erosion. We shall discuss that when we get there. Now, apart from erosion that carries away the important nutrients on the soil, on the topsoil on the surface of the soil, we can also have leaching. leaching. Now, leaching is simply the washing away of some important nutrients to lower levels beyond the reach of plant roots by rainwater. So when it rains, we know that the rain comes from above, it strikes the surface of the soil, and then it's supposed to percolate or seep through the soil until it collects at the very base of the earth. Now, in the course of doing that, if you have a very, very important nutrient somewhere at a particular layer of the soil, it may wash further down and it will get to a profile where plants may not be able to access. And one way of tapping into nutrients that has been washed further down, if you remember, we said we can use crop rotation, deeper roots and then shallow roots. So on our screen, we have a typical picture of a soil, and due to the process of leaching, the nutrients keeps going down and further down. So from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, we have the nutrients going further down, and it is even beyond the reach of the grass. So you need a plant with a very deep root to tap into those nutrients. One other thing that causes soil infertility or it depletes the soil of its nutrients is bush burning. Bush burning. Many a times we have our friends and brothers who go hunting. They are looking for wild animals and they want to get what we call bush meat. And in the course of doing that, they set fire. Now, these fires, when they are set during the dry season, spreads very, very fast. And that means that it's going to consume every plant on the surface of the soil. And in addition to that, also burn the organic material. Now, the soil is now exposed, the wind blows, or the rains come, and it carries away the topsoil. So we can say that this is the burning of vegetation before planting, which destroys nutrients and humus in topsoil. Now, like I mentioned earlier, it exposes the soil to erosion. It exposes the soil to erosion. In some other countries, they have what we call heat waves. And during those seasons, the temperatures go so high that some portions of the forest catch fire. And sometimes they will have to go fighting the fire, and people lose their lives in the course of that. So this is a fair advice to our brothers and sisters who are always hunting for bushmeat, that during the dry season, we plead with them to tone down. In fact, bushfire is not helpful. So I advise you not to do that and use the appropriate means of hunting as allowed by wildlife. Now we can also have overcropping. Overcropping. Now it is also called continuous cropping or cultivation. When you plant crops on the same piece of land over a long period of time, the entire nutrients in the soil will get finished. And that means that your plants will not have the nutrients we mentioned earlier, and they are going to show the symptoms. And that means that you have to find a way of replacing or replenishing the nutrients in the plant. Now, as a result of that, we say that overcropping, which is also known as continuous cropping or cultivation, is a way of farming on the same piece of land over a long period of time. Now, like I mentioned earlier, this depletes the soil of its nutrients. Right, it depletes the soil of its nutrients. So on our screens, we have two images, a young man digging holes to plants, and you can see that the plant looks very, very dry, and it doesn't even seem to have nutrients. But well, we have to run a test to ascertain the extent of depletion. And on the right-hand side too, we have a soil that has been heavily plowed, and even nothing is growing on it. So that means that the nutrients are no more there, and we have to find a way of reintroducing them into the soil. Sometimes our human activities also result in the loss of soil fertility as a result of landscaping or creating a path in a bush. You know, as you walk in the bush, you use what we call a path, and because we are heavy, we end up compacting the surface or the path we take, and that means that that portion of the soil will lose its fertility. So if you go to places where they use path, you see that plants don't normally grow along the path, but on the sides of the path. So we see that surface compacting is the hardening of the topsoil due to continuous walking of livestock and human at a given place. So if you keep walking along the same path, you are going to lose the fertility of the place. That means that that nutrient on that part of on that stretch of the soil will be lost due to movement of animals and humanity. Now, I said earlier that it's exactly what happens on the bush part where soil aeration is reduced. So if you plant any crop, they will not get enough oxygen or air, and eventually it will die. So we have a picture, in fact, two pictures on our screen where a path has been created somewhere in the forest. And you notice that the size of the path looks green, but the very point where people walk, all right, looks brown, and you don't have anything growing there because the soil is compact, there's no aeration, and the nutrients on the topsoil too has been blown away by the wind or air or probably water that came down some time ago. Well, another interesting factor that causes loss of soil fertility is overgrazing. Overgrazing, livestock especially, and then wild animals, all right? So we need animals because they serve as the primary protein source, but they also have to feed. And sometimes for them to feed, some people allow their livestock to go feeding, all right, on the free range. And that means that we could have an overgrazing on certain portions of the land. So the number of the animals are more and the place is very small. So they end up munching all the greens around, and that would deplete the soil of its nutrients. So excessive or overgrazing by livestock as well as wildlife, all right? So livestock, we are looking at the cattle or the sheep and the goats, all right, around us. But in the wild, you could have antelopes, and then you could have zebras. If you watch Nat Geo World, it's an interesting thing. But they move together, and as they are going, they feed on the grass, all right, or on the plains. And that means that those portions of the land, if not restored, may lose their fertility over a period of time. So showing on our screens, we have two images. On the left-hand side, we have cattle, and then on the right-hand side, too, we have cattle. You can see that the place looks bare because they've been grazing and overly grazing on the same piece of land. Now, for this image, we have wildlife, all right? We have wildlife grazing in the plains. And these wildlife, they multiply, so they have a very large population. And when they move, they feed on almost everything on their path, destroying the soil cover, and also in the process, the soil loses its nutrients. Excessive irrigation, another point, excessive irrigation. Well, some people are interested in cropping, and as a result of that, they will have to use water to water the plants because they know that the plant needs water, particularly during the dry season. But in the course of doing that, they end up overly irrigating the land, and that washes the nutrients further down the soil. That means that we are going to have leaching occurring on those lands, and the plants, even though there is water, will not be able to access the nutrients, and they also look stunted. So they cannot grow, and you may think that it is because the water is okay or something has happened, but it's because the nutrients in the soil have been washed further down. So we say it's the manual pumping of water on farmland, manual pumping of water on farmland, and this washes down or away important plant nutrients, hence rendering the soil infertile, So we have two farms, all right, images of two farms on our screens, and you can see extreme irrigation, all right, so that they can produce more vegetables. Now, as a result of that, they end up losing more nutrients, and they will have to continuously buy fertilizers or manure, all right, to restore the nutrients in the soil. Crop removal, another factor that affects or it causes the fertility of soil to go down, crop removal. Now, removal of crops exposes the soil to all forms of erosion. So it means you have planted crops, you have harvested the crops. Some people will just cut the remaining plant and leave the soil bare, but you can leave the plant, and then when it is next farming season, you clear or till the land and use it. Because if you do this, you expose the entire surface of the soil, and if it happens to be that you are in a dry season, the topsoil will be blown away by the wind, and during the wet season, if it is not properly covered, you could have flooding, and that could wash away the surface of the soil and its nutrients away. So it is advised that crops are harvested without removing the plants totally to protect the soil. Fertilizers. Fertilizers. So we say that fertilizer is simply any material of natural or synthetic origin that is applied to soil or to plant tissue to supply the needed nutrient elements for plant growth and development. So remember, the soil needs the nutrients, the plants will also have to work on the nutrients and then produce food, out of which we will also go and harvest and then eat. So if you don't have fertilizers also, it could cause it. So we want to look a little deeper into fertilizers. So we say that fertilizers, apart from supplying the plants with the needed nutrient elements, also enrich the soil, and this enhances soil fertility. So it gives nutrient to the soil, and it also enhances the soil fertility by improving upon the texture. All right, we'll talk about fertilizers in detail very soon. By improving upon the texture as well as other factors. So on our screen, we have two forms of fertilizers. On the left-hand side, we have the inorganic. They look like pellets or gray sand, all right? But they're actually material that has been mixed with very, very important nutrients. Naturally, the nitrogen, potassium, and then the phosphorus, all right? And then they look grayish because they added what we call the filler materials, sometimes in the form of limestone. That's why they look like that. And then on the right-hand side, too, the fantastic or the best material that normally we use in planting that gives us the best yield is what we call the organic fertilizer. That's what we get from the manure, and most people like using it because it gives them better yield and also shelf life of the material they harvest increases. Now let's look at classification of fertilizers. Classification of fertilizers. So like I said earlier, we have two main types of fertilizers, the inorganic and then the organic. All right, the inorganic fertilizers as well as the organic. But the organic fertilizers are what we call the manure. Manure, that is the material we gather from the droppings of animals or decomposing parts of plants and animals. We'll look at it in detail very soon. And then those materials which are produced by synthetic means or by eroding minerals is what we call the inorganic fertilizer. So let's start with organic manure. Organic manure. I am sure we've all seen organic manure before. If you haven't seen some before, anytime you have your foul droppings, gather them at a place, leave it to stand for a long time. It looks dark, all right? But make sure the heat in it goes away before you can apply it to your plants, and you see a significant growth in the plant. So organic manure, we can say that, are also known as organic fertilizers. Organic manures are also called organic fertilizers. And they are fertilizers obtained from natural sources such as plant parts and animal parts. So on our screen, we have a typical example of an organic manure tipped or dumped on a farm. They are yet to spread it to improve upon the yield. This is an orange farm, all right, to improve upon the yield of the orange plant. So let's look at the importance of organic manure. Is it important? Is it better than the inorganic? We want to look at the importance of organic manure. So one, we can say that they increase the soil nutrients. Organic manure naturally increase the soil nutrients. They also increase the quantity of soil humus, that material that binds the soil particles together and gives it that texture for proper aeration and a high water holding capacity. So they increase the quantity of soil humus and hence the physical conditions of the soil. So you can see that organic manure is so important to the soil and so important to plants. So let us do our best to apply organic manure to plants around us and enjoy the fruit. Plant more trees, like we said the other time, and make the environment more beautiful. So let's look at some examples of organic manure. Organic manure. So we say that there are different sources of organic manure, some of which are from farmyard manure. So if you have animals you are rearing, their droppings, you can use it to make your organic manure. And then you can also get some from compost, where you have plant parts you have harvested sitting somewhere, and then you leave it to decompose over a period of time. We also look at green manure, another type of manure, and then guano. Guano. Well, they sell guano. We'll talk about guano when we get there. It's another interesting type of organic manure. And you find them in caves where you have lots of bats or seabeds. The beds you find along the coast, they have certain places they live, and because they feed on protein materials, their manure is very, very rich in nitrogen. We are also going to look at another type of organic material we call the fish meal, as well as the blood meal. Fish meal as well as the blood meal. So we shall start with farmyard manure. Like I said earlier, this is a collective name for the droppings of farm animals such as poultry, cattle, pigs. You can also have sheep, goats, and other forms of animals we rear in our farms, and where we keep them in the pens. Normally they defecate there, so we go and collect them, and then they keep them at a place for it to decompose, and spread them under your favorite tree, and you see it growing very, very well. But please make sure that it should stand for a long time to undergo proper decomposition, so that the manure doesn't kill the plant. Yes, organic manure can kill the plant if you don't apply it properly. So on your screen, we have what you call the cattle manure, where they rear the cattle. The droppings, all right, can be collected, and it can be allowed to decompose over a period of time. And we can use that to fertilize the soil, and hence arrest what we call soil fertility loss. Equally, another type of farming we find in our communities is poultry or fowl rearing, where people rear fowls, all right? And farmers will tell you that when they are done doing a season of farming, they are able to harvest large quantities of manure, which they can use to fertilize a portion of the land, grow other forms of crops, and bring it back to feed the next set of generation of birds. Well, so I mentioned compost as another type of organic manure, and we are saying that this is a mass of rotten organic matter made from waste plant residue, like I said earlier. So we have plant residue decomposing. You can put them together, and then you use them to fertilize the soil, and that's going to increase soil productivity. So you are going to get better yield from lands that has been fertilized with the compost. So let us look at green manure. Green manure. Well, a green manure is simply a type of organic manure where leguminous plants are planted, like the cowpea or any other leguminous plant you can think of, the bambara beans. And then when the plant is about flowering, then they are plowed into the soil. So remember, leguminous plants, they produce nitrogen. They fix nitrogen in the soil. And then when they are plowed, that is when we don't allow them to fruit. They are actually uprooted and mixed with the soil. That increases the soil fertility, and the farmer can use the land to produce other forms of material. It also increases the physical characteristics of the soil. So we see that this is the growing of leguminous crops and plowing them into the soil at their flowering stage. The leguminous plant fixes nitrogen into the soil, like I said earlier, and while growing, also add organic manure, and when plowed, also into the soil. So if you plow them into the soil will get organic materials, like organic manure, that is from the body of the plant, as well as the nitrogen the plant has fixed into the soil in the form of nitrates for further absorption by the next set of crops which will be planted. Now on your screen, we have a tractor plowing a leguminous plant into the soil, and this will continue until the entire plants have been mixed with the soil, and that enriches the soil of its nitrogen material. Now we also have another form where they are cleared and they are made to cover the surface of the soil for a long time to decompose, after which new set of crops are introduced. Guano. Guano is another type of organic manure, and like I mentioned earlier, we get them from bats as well as seabirds. Bats, they eat fruit. Some of them too are carnivorous. They take blood. So where they live in the caves, their droppings gathered there, and they can be collected and used to fertilize the soil. Because their diets are rich in nitrogen, guano is therefore very, very rich in nitrogen, as well as the phosphates and the potassium. So we can say that it is droppings of seabirds and bats used as fertilizers, and it has an exceptionally high content of nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium. So on your screen, we have a picture of a bat guano, all right, the droppings of a bat. And this picture was taken from a cave. It is good sometimes to visit places like that and then watch nature. Fish meal. Fish meal. In places where fishes are harvested and they are treated for export, they produce waste, but the waste is not usually dumped into the water. It's not supposed to be dumped into the water. The remnants of the fish products can be processed into an organic manure, and that organic manure is what we call the fish meal. So this is a coarsely ground powder made from the cooked flesh of fish. So the remnants, they cook them and they leave it down to decompose. And it's also used as animal feed. These days, because they have a dual purpose, you can use them to fertilize the soil as well as mix the material with animal feed. It is preferred that they are mixed with the animal feed. So these days, we don't have lots of fish meal on the market because they are used also in feeding fowls. So we have a picture on the screen of a typical fish meal fertilizer. The color of the fish meal depends on the fish from which it was taken and the materials that were left behind. So on the left hand side, I see that it looks a bit oily and a bit yellowish as compared to the other ones. So we have different types of fish meals. Blood meal. In abattoirs or places where animals are slaughtered, blood is actually collected, and it is not deposited directly into the drain. They are actually collected and processed into fertilizers, organic fertilizers. They are actually dried and processed into fertilizers. These materials are very, very rich in nutrients. So they can also be used to fertilize the soil and hence arrest soil infertility. So blood meal is actually a dry, inert powder. Inert because it is not harmful. Any harm in it has been eliminated or removed. Made from blood, used as a high nitrogen organic fertilizer and a protein animal feed. So it can also be used just like the fish meal to feed animals, but you can also use it to cultivate your crops or to fertilize the soils around you. Now, blood meal is a byproduct, like I mentioned, of slaughterhouses and is essentially dried animal blood. So when animal blood is dried, it can be processed into what we call the blood meal. So our abattoirs in Ghana is a humble appeal to you not to put the blood that you collect from the animals into the drain, but process them into blood meals that can be bought by farmers to fertilize the soil as well as serve as food nutrients for animals. So on our screens, we have a picture of a blood meal. You can see that it looks reddish because blood is reddish. All right, so it's reddish in color because the blood harvested is reddish. And remember, iron is one element that is a macro element. So because the blood meal is very rich in iron, it also supplies the soil or the plant with the nutrients it needs. It's not only iron, but you have nitrogen, you have phosphorus, you have molybdenum, you have manganese and zinc, and all kinds of very, very essential nutrients. advantages of using organic manure. So we want to know, when you use the fertilizer and hence the organic manure, is there any advantage you have compared to the inorganic? We'll also look at the inorganic when we get there. So let us consider the advantages of using organic manure. Now, organic manure by nature improves both the fertility and physical condition of the soil. So here you have the fertility as well as the physical nature of the soil. It improves the texture of the soil and also enhances the water holding capacity. So they are relatively cheaper also than the inorganic fertilizers. You only need your animals, you feed them well, and then you collect their droppings, process them into the organic manure, and then you have your organic manure. You are good to go. So it's very, very cheap compared to the inorganic ones. Now, they supply both macronutrients as well as micronutrients. I believe you remember we spoke about macro and micro essential nutrients. Now, organic manure also releases nutrients into the soil gradually. That is a nice part about organic manure. They release the nutrients not abruptly, but they hold the nutrients and gently release the nutrients as and when the plant needs them. So they can stay over the surface of the soil, and the plant can access nutrients over a long period of time. Leaching doesn't affect them very much because they can hold the nutrients and release them in bits. So they release nutrients into the soil gradually, and hence a lasting effect on the soil more than the organic fertilizers. Well, organic fertilizers enhances the growth of microorganisms also. You see, there are some microorganisms that live in the soil. Earlier we said that the soil is also a place where other animals live. All right, so we have some other organic organisms that live in the soil, and organic fertilizers enhance the growth of microorganisms, unlike inorganic fertilizers, which destroy some of them. And we need those microorganisms to enrich the soil. So organic fertilizers, therefore, are very, very, very important. Now, we can also say that organic fertilizers help the soil to retain water. I mentioned earlier that it helps the soil to hold water. So we say that the soil has a high water holding capacity. Not that the soil is clay, but it has a huge damp, all right, in it. And that helps plants to flourish and hence give us the yield we want. Now, prolonged application of organic fertilizers does not cause pollution. So you can have your organic fertilizer. Maybe you don't know where to, you can spread it over the soil surface. If you still have more, spread it over the soil surface. And remember, they are going to release the nutrients in bits. So if you plant your crops there, you are going to get an extremely high yield, and the plants will look very healthy. Sometimes when you go there, you breathe fresh air, and you are excited your plants are growing very, very well. Well, in as much as it has its own advantages, surely there will be some disadvantages of using organic manure. So we can say that they are difficult to transport. You see, because they are bulky, they are very heavy, you can't easily transport them from one place to the other. So we say that they are difficult to transport because of their weight and bulk, and they cannot be readily analyzed to quantify their nutrient content. So unlike the inorganic fertilizer, where you can run laboratory tests to analyze the concentrations of some of these essential nutrients, with the organic manure, you cannot do so because the content of the material depends on the animal's feed. Okay, so you cannot readily analyze it unless you want to only analyze one from a particular animal. Then you can't do that. Now, sometimes they contain weeds and plant disease causing pathogens. So some organic manure ends up gathering weed seed, the seeds of weeds, all right? And then they also carry pathogens that causes diseases in plants. Remember, some of this, the organic material or the organic manure is coming from an animal, and the animal fed on other plants or other materials around. So if it ends up picking some of these pathogens, it will mix with the droppings, and eventually it will be transferred back again into the soil. And if you plant a crop there, and that plant is sensitive to those pathogens, will be affected and you get low yield. Let us compare what we have done so far with inorganic fertilizers. Inorganic fertilizers. Well, inorganic, meaning that they were produced from synthetic means or they were eroded from rock minerals. So we can say that they are also called chemical or commercial fertilizers. We call them chemical or commercial fertilizers. And these are chemical substances manufactured from inorganic materials, all right? Inorganic materials. Earlier we saw a picture of the fertilizer, a picture of the fertilizer. And we said it looks great, it looks grayish, and it comes in granules. So you see on your picture on the screen that we have these fertilizers. Now we will look at the importance of inorganic manure, and then when we are done, we'll compare it to that of the organic. Well, commercial fertilizers, we said, contain one or more plant macronutrients. So in as much as we have the organic containing a range, depending on the animal's feed, inorganic manures can be restricted. So you can have either 1, 2, 3, or as many as minerals you want to mix together to form the manure. So nutrient elements of inorganic fertilizers are readily available to crops because they are in the inorganic form. They easily dissolve in the soil, and the plant can readily take them into themselves. So we say that nutrient elements of inorganic fertilizers are readily available to crops without going through decomposition. So you don't have decomposition, gradual loss of the nutrients. Let's look at examples of commercial fertilizers. Well, most fertilizers, because the plant needs are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, they are classified as the NPK, or the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And you can get most of these commercial fertilizers in the form of urea. Urea, all right, urea, the byproduct of metabolism in animals, urea, as well as your lime, calcium hydroxide, lime. Now, we can also have ammonium sulfate, all right, ammonium sulfate, and then the muriate of potash, which is barely potassium chloride, muriate of potash. You can also have another form of the inorganic fertilizer in the form of the superphosphate. These are compounds that have been produced containing high concentrations of phosphorus in the phosphate form. When we move on to classification of inorganic fertilizers, so we've spoken about organic fertilizers, we have done also inorganic fertilizer. I want to look at, do we have types of inorganic fertilizers and how are they classified? So we look at classification of inorganic fertilizers. So we say that there are several types of inorganic fertilizers, but they are largely classified into two. So we have the single or the simple fertilizer, and have the compound or the mix. So where the fertilizer contains 1, 2, or just 1 or 2 minerals, we say it's a simple, all right, or it's a single fertilizer. But where you have 2 or more, all right, we call it compound or mixed fertilizers. So we are considering the single or simple fertilizers. And I said earlier that they contain 1 element at a time. So we say that they are also called straight fertilizers. They don't have any other thing. So straight fertilizers, and they contain only 1 macronutrient, that is only nitrogen or only phosphorus or only potassium. So it contains only nitrogen, only phosphorus or only potassium. So let's look at examples of single fertilizers. Examples of single fertilizers. I mentioned muriate of potash, which contains potassium, but it comes in the form of the potassium chloride. And urea, the byproduct of metabolism. You find urea in our urine. Very interesting. People don't know that it's a form of manure. But urea, which contains nitrogen, all right, contains nitrogen. And then single superphosphate, which contains phosphorus. So it has been designed in such a way that there's only phosphate available. We shall look at compound fertilizers. Compound fertilizers. Now, they are also called mixed fertilizers, and these are fertilizers which contains 2 or more plant macronutrients in their relative percentages. So we have 2 or more plant macronutrients in their relative percentages. Now, we have different types of compound fertilizers, and they come in different forms, but they are generally in the form of the NPK. So we have the NPK, the nitrogen, we have the phosphorus and the potassium. On our screen, we have the 15, 15, 15. And that means there are 15% of the material being nitrogen, 15% of the material being phosphorus and 15% of the material being potassium. And by volume, please, by volume. And that means that you have a total of 45%. And when you subtract it from the original 100, you only get 55. So it means that for 100 grams of the fertilizer, 45% consists of the NPK, and the remaining material is a filler material. So I mentioned that we have different types of filler materials. We have the material in the form of the ground bone or clean or sterile dirt. So you can go to the sea, take some of the sea, and then sand, and you wash it well, mix it with the fertilizer. And then you can also have the sawdust, peat moss, as well as ground corn. So we have other forms of the fertilizers I have shown on your screen. You can also have the NPK 20-0-20. So that means that you have 20% nitrogen, 0% phosphorus, and 20% potassium. We have different forms of compound fertilizers. Well, viewers, students, today we have learned a lot about fertilizers. We did a recap and we said that we have different types of fertilizers. We have the simple, and then we also have the mixed, all right, fertilizers. But we said that fertilizers can largely be classified into two, the organic and then the inorganic fertilizers. Then we also looked at ways by which we can prevent soil fertility loss, all right? And we said one way of doing that is by applying fertilizers, and also to ensure that nutrients are not leached, all right? You don't have the soil also exposed. This is how far we can go. It is almost time, and the next time we meet, we shall continue. I am George Loco, your facilitator.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Joy Learning TV.